Order, please. Begin the day routine presenting reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Table reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a report entitled "The Impact of Proposed Reforms for Nova Scotia Private Passenger Automobile." Final report to the Department of Environment and Labour, Province of Nova Scotia.
Sure. Report is tabled. Statements by ministers. Government notice the motion. The Honourable the Premier.
Just give it to me.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Governor-General's Caring Canadian Award is presented to individuals and groups whose unpaid voluntary contributions provide extraordinary help or care to people in the community, and whereas Margaret and Patrick McNair of Fairview have been volunteering for 40 years on behalf of a number of health-related charities, and whereas for 20 years Mrs. McNair has devoted many hours to Fairview Villa, visiting senior citizens and organizing recreational activities, and has been a strong supporter of the Alzheimer's Society, while Mr. McNair, since the late 1970s, has volunteered thousands of hours a year for the Heart and Stroke Foundation, and for the past 25 years has visited many heart surgery patients on a weekly basis. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Patrick and Peggy McNair on receiving the Governor-General's Award and commend this couple who together have generously provided care for members of their community for 4 decades, and I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled "An Act to Amend Chapter 14 of the Acts of 2002, the Volunteer Protection Act."
The Honourable Minister of Justice begs leave to introduce a bill entitled "An Act to Amend Chapter 14 of the Acts of 2002, the Volunteer Protection Act."
Bill numbered 8, entitled "An Act to Amend Chapter 14 of the Acts of 2002, the Volunteer Protection Act."
Order this bill be read a second time at a future date. The Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled "An Act to Amend Chapter 23 of the Revised Statutes of 1989, the Assessment Act."
The Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect begs leave to introduce a bill entitled "An Act to Amend Chapter 23 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Assessment Act."
Bill number 9, entitled "An Act to Amend Chapter 23 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Assessment Act."
Order this bill be read a second time at a future date. Notice of motion. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas at present building codes require that all smoke detectors be wired into an electrical system, which in times of power outages is useless, and whereas many constituents on social assistance cannot afford to purchase a battery-operated smoke detector, and whereas the use of candles during this emergency can and perhaps already has taken lives, therefore be it resolved that this government, as a landlord to thousands of low-income Nova Scotians, show its leadership and ensure that all public housing units have battery backup smoke detectors in place. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. whereas the convening of the First General Assembly of Nova Scotia met for the dispatch of business at the courthouse at Halifax on October 2nd, 1758, and whereas this was the first assembly of elected representatives in Canada which consisted of 19 men, and whereas the representative government of 1758 was the first big step in the evolution of our democratic institutions. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House recognize today as the 245th anniversary of the First General Assembly of Nova Scotia. And I would ask waiver and passage, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. Order, please. It's very difficult to hear the members on the floor and also the response. I'd ask the honourable members just to at least pay attention while the members were waiting for a response from the floor. The honourable member for Guysborough, Sheet Harbour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sunnyvale native Constable Darren Pelly made a very special trip home to Guysborough County this September as part of his duties as a member of the RCMP musical ride, and whereas performing in front of a sold-out audience in Sherbrooke, this was the first time Constable Pelly had the opportunity to perform as part of the RCMP musical ride on home turf since joining the ride some 3 years ago. And whereas Constable Pelly, a member of the RCMP for 7 years, was a member of the Antigonish detachment of the RCMP before leaving for Ottawa to take advantage of the wonderful opportunity to become a member of the musical ride. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in recognizing Constable Darren Pelly, who is an outstanding ambassador for the RCMP and for all of Guysborough County, and I request favor of notice.
Mr. Waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax, Shabukdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the damage done by Hurricane Juan in the Halifax metro area was extensive, but that damage has brought out the best in many people determined to assist one another. And whereas one example of the generosity of recent days has been that of Daryl Cormier of the Ardmore Tea Room on Quimple Road, who cooked his entire freezer of food and gave it away to those in the neighborhood who, like him, had lost their electric power. And whereas this family business, so long established in the west end of Halifax, has now reinforced the high regard that everyone in the area has for the Cormier family, therefore be it resolved that this House commends Daryl Cormier and the staff of the Ardmore Tea Room for their generosity and public spirit as shown during the aftermath of Hurricane Juan. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the constituency of Halifax Citadel, in which sits Point Pleasant Park, was one of the hardest hit parts of Nova Scotia in the last storm. And whereas Point Pleasant Park has long been recognized by all Nova Scotians as one of the jewels in the crown of Nova Scotia. And whereas this beautiful park now lies in tatters, with much of the park having been leveled. Therefore, be it resolved that all Nova Scotians take time to remember the park as it was and work toward the day when we can restore the park to its original natural beauty. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Fisherman's Life Museum in Oyster Pond is a tiny house and farm and once home to the turn-of-the-century inshore fisherman, his wife and 13 daughters, and is now Nova Scotia's smallest museum, and whereas also one of the province's most fantastic museums, Fisherman's Life Museum invites visitors into the daily life of a coastal fishing community, providing a real taste of the lifestyle which makes up an important part of Nova Scotia's culture and heritage. And whereas this year is the 25th anniversary of this museum, and to help celebrate, there was singing and refreshments, and members of the Antique Engine Club and Antique Car Club brought their automobiles for show. And therefore be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate all those who have helped build and grow the Fisherman's Life Museum, and encourage all to take time to visit the charming and revealing glimpse into our coastal history. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Northumberland Fisheries Museum in the town of Pictou has just celebrated 25 years of success, and whereas the museum contains thousands of interesting artifacts related to the history of the local fishery, and whereas the museum has plans to expand and relocate so as to attract even more visitors, therefore it be resolved that this Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate the Northumberland Fisheries Museum on their 25 years of achievement and wish them every success in the future. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counter-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the teachers of Nova Scotia's public education system make immeasurable contributions to our society, and whereas teachers are often overlooked for the enormous breadth of personal and professional demands that they bring to the school community, and whereas the United Nations has designated October 5th as World Teachers' Day, observed in over 100 countries, with this year's theme being Opening Doors to a Better World. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House extend sincere wishes of good luck to the teachers of Nova Scotia in ensuring that the needs of future generations are taken into consideration in this increasingly complex, multicultural, and technological world. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counter-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for the second year in a row, the role of Canada's Silver Cross Mother has been bestowed to a Nova Scotian, and whereas Charlotte Smith of Tatamagouche will represent all Canadian mothers who have lost sons or daughters in military and naval service at the 2003 Remembrance Day service at the National War Memorial in Ottawa, and whereas her son, Private Nathan Smith, was one of 4 soldiers killed while on duty in Afghanistan in April 2002. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House commend Charlotte Smith for accepting this honor on behalf of all mothers who have lost a child while protecting the rights and freedoms of the citizens of our country. Mr. Speaker, I ask waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counter-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Sorry, David. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Terrence Bay Telus Titans, coached by Shane Slonwhite, captured the Eastern Canadian Fastball Championship in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Whereas the tournament MVP was Josh Slonwhite, and the best pitcher of the tournament was Patrick Slonwhite, all of Terrence Bay.
Order, please. Order, please. Honourable member Timberley Prospect.
Whereas the tournament MVP was Josh Slonwhite and the best pitcher was Patrick Slonwhite, all of Terrence Bay. Whereas this team finished off with a successful season with these impressive championships, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate the Terrence Bay Telus Titans on their Eastern Canadian Fastball Championship. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counter-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this government has failed to provide any assistance to the Capital District in developing an action plan that will deal with the backlog of surgeries, and whereas emergency room patients are experiencing waits between 10 and 12 hours because this government is failing to provide the appropriate solutions to relieve the burden on our hospitals. And whereas due to the excessive waiting times, emergency room patients are leaving before they even see a doctor because of this government's inability to appropriately plan for emergencies. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of this House recognize that this government has failed to plan for a backlog of surgeries and the excessive long emergency room waits experienced by many Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request waiver, here and no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution.
The honourable member Chester St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Manning Foundation's award program, which began in 1982, was established to encourage and reward Canadian innovation, and this year, from over 70 nominees from across Canada, 2 Nova Scotians have been recognized for their innovations. Whereas Kirk Swinimer of Chester Basin has been awarded the prestigious Ernest C. Manning Award for inventing a cone-shaped footing form for construction tubes called Bigfoot Systems, which has drastically reduced labor costs associated with building structures from post foundations. And whereas Tim Edwards of Halifax, a mechanical engineer in Novacor, is being recognized for developing an air chamber crab processor, a compressed air system which cost-effectively removes crab meat from hard shell segments of the crab. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate both Kirk Swinimer and Tim Edwards on receiving the Ernest C. Manning Award for their innovative solutions to practical problems and encourage them to continue to put their ideas to the test. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas many Nova Scotians have been hard hit by the after effects of Hurricane Juan, and whereas seniors and those on fixed income are finding it particularly difficult to pay for the services to remove trees and other hazards from their properties. And whereas yesterday the Minister of Service of Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations and Environment and Labour said that price gouging by companies or businesses would not be tolerated. Therefore, be it resolved that this government establish an appropriate staffed hotline where Nova Scotians can report instant of price gouging, and these to be followed up immediately by the government. Mr. Speaker, I ask waiver and notice of passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. Here no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this government has approved a 3.9 hectare rock quarry in Digby Neck without performing an environmental assessment to determine the environmental impacts, and whereas the lack of assessment of a huger basalt quarry proposed for Digby Neck simply does not make any sense. And whereas it is obvious Nova Scotia's mines approval process needs to be improved so that the appropriate methods are taken to ensure our environment is preserved for the future. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge that the Digby Rock Quarry should have required an environmental assessment before construction began, and that our mine approval process needs further study. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. There are several noes. Notice the table. The honourable Minister of Order, please. The honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Brian McLeod of Truro won the 2003 Canadian Blind Golf Championship by 27 strokes over the 2002 champion. Whereas in 2003, Brian McLeod has also won the California Blind Classic, the first annual Nova Scotia Blind Golf Championship. And whereas Brian McLeod hopes to compete in the 2004 World Championship in Australia, therefore be it resolved, this House congratulate Brian McLeod and his coaches on his 2003 victories and wish him every success in the 2004 World Blind Golf Championship in Australia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Hurricane Juan caused extensive damage to many schools in the Halifax Regional Municipality, leaving them vulnerable without security systems, and whereas the constituents in Dartmouth East have a pride in their schools, and whereas many constituents in Dartmouth East have heard the call to help protect our schools' resources on behalf of their children and others, therefore be it resolved that this provincial legislature thank all those who have helped out in this situation, including Barry and Wanda Patterson of Churchill Drive. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas ACA Cooperative Limited celebrated its 60th anniversary on September 7th, 2003, and over its 60 years has grown in one of the Valley's leading poultry and ag producers. And whereas ACA employs nearly 700 staff located in approximately 20 different areas throughout the Valley, and whereas ACA places a strong emphasis on supporting local organizations, including the Atlantic Theatre Festival, the Valley Regional Hospital, Acadia University's athletic department, several youth organizations, and locally held events and activities. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate ACA Cooperative Limited on its 60th anniversary and recognize its overwhelming contribution to their local communities. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver without notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Bridgewater Town Crier Aussie Styles was recently named Nova Scotia's #1 town crier at the provincial championships held in Lunenburg, and whereas this year's event marked the 19th annual championship to determine Nova Scotia's best town crier, and whereas a total of 10 individuals, all members of the Nova Scotia Guild of Town Criers, participate in the event in Lunenburg. Therefore, be it resolved, MLAs in the House of Assembly applaud the efforts of Bridgewater's Aussie Styles while also congratulating him for winning this year's championship. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Pictou Academy has a long history of educational excellence dating back to its founder, Thomas McCullough, and whereas enrollment numbers have remained strong for this 2003-2004 school year, and whereas there is strong community support for a high school in the town of Pictou, therefore it be resolved that this government continues to maintain the educational excellence in the town of Pictou by fully supporting Pictou Academy. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. Here no. Notice is tabled. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party. Order, please.
Member would read the final clause of that resolution.
No, member for Pictou West, just the therefore it be resolved portion only, please.
Therefore, it be resolved that this government continues to maintain the educational excellence in the town of Pictou by fully supporting the Pictou Academy.
No. Request for waiver. Here no. Notice is tabled. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Halifax Public Gardens have long been a favorite gathering spot for the people of Halifax and Nova Scotia, and whereas most Nova Scotians have come to the gardens to enjoy the scenery and tranquility it provides, and whereas the gardens have been substantially damaged by the high winds and rains that came with Hurricane Juan, therefore, be it resolved that all Nova Scotians anxiously await the restoration of the public gardens to its unmatched natural beauty unique to the city of Halifax. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without delay.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lunenburg County Detachment of the RCMP held its annual Cops for Cancer event on August 30th, 2003, and whereas more than 30 participants representing local emergency and community service organizations raised over $5,000 for cancer research, and whereas the Blockhouse and District Fire Department won the Cops for Cancer plaque for the second year in a row for raising the most money. Therefore, it be resolved that this House congratulates the Lunenburg County Detachment of the RCMP for hosting another successful Cops for Cancer fundraiser, and the Blockhouse and District Fire Department for working hard to support a very worthy cause. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
For waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jeffrey Moore of Lower Sackville has been chosen to represent Nova Scotia's Camp Connect for burn survivors in Washington, D.C. Whereas Camp Connect, based in New Glasgow, provides a safe and enjoyable environment for both children and adults burn survivors from the Maritimes to come together and share their experience. And whereas the International Association of Firefighters hosts an annual firefighters camp in Washington, D.C. by inviting one firefighter and a child from the camps across North America. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House congratulate Jeffrey Moore of Lower Sackville and Halifax Regional Firefighter Andrea Hollett on being selected to attend this year's camp. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and notice of passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to present my resolution in French, followed with a translation, please. Monsieur le Président, par la présente, j'avise que je proposerai à une date ultérieure l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que le groupe acadien Blue, qui a ses racines à la baie Sainte-Marie dans la municipalité de Clare, a reçu le prix Grand Prix, et attendu que ce groupe s'est illustré dans les pays suivants: la France, le Danemark, la Norvège, l'Italie, la Belgique, l'Allemagne, les États-Unis, la Corse et la Hollande à plusieurs reprises, et attendu que ce groupe, tout en se distinguant par son talent artistique, contribue à faire la promotion de l'Acadie et de la Nouvelle-Écosse, qu'il soit résolu que cette Chambre exprime ses félicitations et transmet ses meilleurs vœux de succès aux membres du groupe Blue et leur souhaite plein succès. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Acadian Group Blue, originating from la Baie Sainte-Marie in the municipality of Clare, has received le Prix Grand Prix, and whereas this group has performed in France, Denmark, Norway, Italy, Belgium, Germany, United States, Corsica, and Holland several times, and whereas this group is promoting abroad the Acadian heritage and rich culture background of this province, therefore it be resolved that the members of this legislature congratulate the Acadian Group Blue for their latest achievement. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice, please.
Waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Antigonish native 20-year-old Greg Hadley competed in the World Scottish Heavy Event Championship in Antigonish this summer and turned in an impressive performance against the top professionals in the world. And whereas in a summer competition in Prince Edward Island, Mr. Hadley unofficially set a new world mark in the 22-pound amateur hammer, and whereas in his first appearance, Mr. Hadley topped a field of 11 throwers to claim the national crown at the Glengarry Highland Games in Maxwell, Ontario, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House recognize the pride felt by all in Antigonish and congratulate Mr. Hadley on winning his first Canadian amateur title. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Terrence Bay Thunderbirds captured the Softball Nova Scotia Over 30 Masters Orthodox Championship, whereas the Thunderbirds have a long and glorious tradition along the Prospect Road and across Nova Scotia, whereas this team is made up of local men who have demonstrated a strong commitment to the sport of softball. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate the members of the Terrence Bay Thunderbirds on their provincial championship with best wishes on and off the field in the future. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas some 8,000 volunteer firefighters provide a valuable service to the people of Nova Scotia, and whereas since Hurricane Juan, many of these volunteer firefighters have provided thousands of hours of community service, saving government valuable tax dollars, and whereas in the 1999 John Hamm Tory Blue Book, there was a promise of a $500 tax credit. Therefore, that was yet to be delivered. Therefore, be it resolved that John Hamm government fulfill its long-promised $500 tax credit commitment as outlined on page 38 of its Blue Book.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Colchester, Muscataba Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution, which I am advancing on behalf of the Honourable the Member for Cumberland South. Whereas creating safe and healthy workplaces through safe work practices, adequate training, and suitable equipment is a shared responsibility between employers and employees, and whereas Oxford Frozen Foods management and employees at the Halfway River plant thought their 558 days without lost time accident record was unsurpassable, but it wasn't. They surpassed it this summer. And whereas the management of Oxford Frozen Foods acknowledged this outstanding achievement, attributing the success to the knowledgeable staff who pay attention to detail, who think safety, and who already look out for each other. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House commend the employees of the Oxford Frozen Foods in Halfway River for their excellent safety record of over 569 days without a lost time accident, and as a shining example of how safe and healthy workplaces can be maintained. And Mr. Speaker, on your behalf, I request waiver of notice.
Waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contraminded, nay. Motion is carried. No further resolutions? The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to the notice I've given you under Rule 43, I wish to move that the business of the House be set aside for the purpose of discussing a matter of urgent public importance, the growing crisis threatening the future of the cattle, dairy, and sheep producers brought on by the discovery of one cow in Alberta with bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE. This crisis threatens producers. It also threatens the rural economy. According to the Federation of Agriculture, approximately 1/3 of the registered farms in the province depend on ruminant livestock for a living. 1/3 of remaining registered farm businesses depend on ruminant livestock as a part of their income stream, approximately 1,300 farm businesses. These farm businesses purchase $30 million worth of goods and services from other businesses in rural Nova Scotia. Applying recognized multiplier ratios, the impact of our cattle industry on the rural economy, excluding wages, exceeds $82 million a year. In terms of employment in rural communities throughout the province, the cattle industry accounts for over 900 full-time job equivalents. Using recognized multipliers, this sector of our industry contributes an additional $11 million to Nova Scotia's rural economy. The BSE crisis clearly has and will continue to have a multi-million-dollar impact on the farming industry and on the rural economy of Nova Scotia. The total impact of BSE on economic activity in rural Nova Scotia could reach $40 million. Federal aid packages and the new agricultural policy framework's disaster relief programs in particular are inadequate to address the crisis facing farmers in Nova Scotia. BSE relief started and ended too early to benefit the majority of beef, sheep, and dairy producers. It's unclear at this point what disaster relief farmers can anticipate in response to the damage done to their operations by Hurricane Juan. The future of farming in Nova Scotia hangs in the balance. This is a matter of utmost importance, deserving the immediate attention of the House in a way that is not possible within the limits of question period.
Thank you. The information was received in my office according to the rules, 2 hours preceding to the opening of the House today. I have reviewed the matter and the rules that are applicable in this case, and I've ruled that the matter is proper to be discussed. It does come within the ministerial action or the administrative responsibilities of the government. So I'll now ask for concurrence of the House. I'll just read the first portion of the motion. It says, "Dear Mr. Speaker, this is to give you notice under Rule 43 that I wish to move the business of the House be set aside for the purpose of discussing a matter of urgent public importance, the growing crisis threatening the future of the cattle, dairy, and sheep producers brought on by the discovery of one cow in Alberta with BSE. Now ask for the concurrence of the House for this to be emergency debate to take place at the moment of interruption, was at 6 p.m. tonight. Agreed? Agreed? So there will obviously be no light debate this evening, but 2 hours beginning at 6 p.m. tonight for the emergency debate. Thank you. Orders of the day or questions put by members. Question period begin at 12:42 and at 1:42. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. The Premier confirmed this morning in a media interview he does not intend to restrict disaster assistance to the limits that his government announced yesterday afternoon. The Federation of Agriculture advises that every single farm in the path of the hurricane was affected, many of them very seriously. Farmers have lost their crops, their winter feed, many or all of their buildings, many woodlots have been hit hard. So farmers, fishermen, and others need to know exactly what disaster assistance will be available so that they and their creditors can decide whether or not it is possible to keep operating. So my question, Mr. Speaker, is will the Premier tell this House and all Nova Scotians the extent of the disaster assistance that will be made available to end the confusion and uncertainty that was created by yesterday's news release and subsequent statements of the Minister?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the question. It gives me an opportunity to discuss publicly some conversations that I was able to have and the Minister responsible for emergency measures was able to have with two federal ministers yesterday, and conversations that I was able to have with the Honourable Paul Martin today. And we were able to discuss in a very positive atmosphere the fact that current programs that are available through federal financial plans for disasters may well not cover some of the significant losses that are being experienced both in the agricultural sector and in the fishing sector. We received an excellent initial response from Federal Minister McCollum, who indicated that he would look at advance funding or early funding, and as well he would look at the issue of funding outside of the current programs.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, I'm pleased that the federal government is going to look at their program to see the way that it can be expanded, because that would be an important element of any disaster relief plan. But my question for the Minister, or rather for the Premier, and he knows this because disaster assistance for spring flooding has been snarled up by insurers who are looking for things like pre-existing conditions to determine what they're going to pay out. So many people have not received compensation even for those floods. Farmers who have suffered spring flooding or BSE problems, in fact, Mr. Speaker, may find themselves the subject of insurance investigations. Many business owners, fishermen, and farmers are facing immediate decisions about repair costs, replacement costs, and the future of their family farm and or business. Will the government commit today to the immediate financial assistance that is needed for farmers, fishermen, and businesses to deal with the damage and carry on?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure the member opposite didn't suggest that proper accounting should not go on in terms of government money. But, and I must also remind members of the House and the member opposite that the programs we're talking about are cost-shared programs. The province is already involved, but when we're dealing with programs that involve the federal government, they obviously have a considerable say in terms of the way in which these programs are administered, and we will work with them. We got a good response yesterday. We will build on that response.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the files that go back and forth between here and Ottawa take a great deal of time to resolve, and the Premier is well aware of this. Every day of uncertainty creates more problems for farming and fishing operations that face seasonal deadlines and, frankly, Mr. Speaker, the onset of winter. Many businesses are facing hard decisions, and the deadline for their survival may come sooner than anyone wishes, and certainly, Mr. Speaker, sooner than that file is going to make its way back from Ottawa. When does the Premier expect that his government will be able to provide clear, fair, and reasonable guidelines as to the disaster assistance that will be available to help people recover from Hurricane Juan?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as we speak, our Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries Minister d'Entremont is in Ottawa in a meeting with the federal minister, Van Cleef, discussing how current programs can better assist members of the agricultural community. So the government is very much aggressively pursuing solutions with Ottawa.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. It's day 4 since Hurricane Juan struck. 60,000 Nova Scotians are still without power. I can report from touring daily in my home constituency, I'm sure you're familiar with this, Mr. Premier, that it has been devastating. There's still several streets that remain blocked. In almost every street, there are hanging wires that remain a danger to all people in that community. Everyone knows the hard work that is being done by EMO officials in Nova Scotia Power, for example, but what I hear constantly and what we see is a lack of coordination and information. The question is a simple one. Is there a written plan that lays out the priorities and the responsibilities of EMO, the military, Nova Scotia Power, the municipalities, and the province of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I do sympathize with the residents that the member opposite represents, because that area of the city was one of the hardest hit areas in the province, if not the hardest area hit in the province. But in regards to how this thing is being coordinated, I can reassure the member opposite, members of the House, and the public at large that EMO is running very effectively. I had the opportunity this morning to accompany the Honourable Paul Martin, who attended the morning briefing session of the Emergency Measures Organization across the harbour. And Mr. Martin, following the briefing and following a discussion as to the way in which the 3 levels of government are in fact under the same roof over in the Dartmouth office, Mr. Martin said that this joint effort may prove a model for the rest of Canada. He was extremely impressed about the level of cooperation and coordination that was occurring across the water.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, with the greatest respect to Mr. Martin, a person who I respect a great deal. Several of us have been here for the past 4 days. We have been living it day in and day out, not just flying around in helicopters, on the ground, finding out what people's problems are. The question related to whether or not there is a plan. Mr. Premier, is there a written plan?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, what we have is a coordinated effort that is very quickly addressing what was a monumental storm. And what we have, I believe, is a process that is very much on schedule. I don't think there's anyone sitting in this House today that would have anticipated us being any further ahead today than we are today.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
Having said that, what I can report in terms of one of the most immediate issues is the resumption of power for the residents of the member opposite's constituency, as well in my own constituency, constituencies, for example, that are the responsibility of the Minister of Health and the member for Colchester North, that as of now, the report we got this morning, 45,000 customers remain to be connected in Metro, 15,000 outside of Metro, and that is a marked improvement over the report that we'd received yesterday. So what we're reporting today is significant improvement in what has occurred overnight.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party in your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's clear that there is no plan, that this is a haphazard catch-as-catch-can. Yesterday, we identified an example of senior residents.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party, your final supplement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, for example, we identified seniors in Sir John Thompson Manor. They were still without power at that time and who hadn't received information or a warm meal for some period of time. It's interesting to note that after our questions and additional calls were made, we understand that the power has been restored. Last night, additional assistance and hot meals were provided. But that was only one building, Mr. Speaker. There are dozens and dozens of other Sir John Thompson buildings around this province. So the question for the Premier is, what organized effort is being made to go door to door to ensure that seniors and others are receiving the assistance they need door to door?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a good question, and I refer to the Minister responsible for Emergency Measures Organization.
The Honourable Minister responsible for the EMO.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can certainly assure the member opposite and the House the dedicated workers at EMO and all the volunteers across this province, and especially in the city, have been working very hard, and I certainly hope the member opposite is not insinuating or impugning those people and their efforts. But when we come to the individual agencies and we break it down to social services, obviously that department is working with individuals through their caseworkers to alleviate individual situations, as well as the Metro Food Bank and the Housing Authority are ensuring that supplies and food are put forward. As well, 12 barbecues were also held by public housing units in partnership with EMO, Metro Food Bank, and local businesses. And some of them the member opposite may recognize: Sunrise Manor, Dr. Samuel Prince, Sir John Thompson, Timberley, Margaret Lader, Craythorne, Richmond, Acadia Square, Westmount, Cornwallis.
Order, please. Order, please. Thank you. The Honourable Member Hants East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, farmers in Nova Scotia have been hit by 3 disasters this year. Under the Tory government, the Department of Agriculture has been decimated and farmers need assistance. Other provinces have already put millions in relief into farmers' pockets while this government sits idly by. Farmers need and deserve better than that. They're coming to this legislature today to make that point, and they're listening carefully to what the Premier has to say. So I ask the Premier, why has this government dragged its feet in providing assistance to farmers while $2 million in relief funding sits untouched?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much. I refer that to the Acting Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Acting Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member raises a very important and serious question, and certainly that's why this government participated in the BSC program and continue to accept applications up to September 30th on cattle slaughtered during that period, and make payments to farmers as well. Interim payments are there. The dollars from the province on transition funding will allow farmers to project what their probable loss will be, and that they would be able to receive an interim payment for those cow-calf producers in the very near future.
Now, member for Hants East on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ironic that the Minister in charge of EMO is the Acting Minister of Agriculture, former Minister of Agriculture, and never stopped acting while he was in that position. Mr. Speaker, farmers are still waiting for help. Mr. Speaker, farmers are still waiting for help from floods last spring, and I'll table a letter from Sandra Fisher of Brookfield. She describes a bureaucratic nightmare farmers in her community have faced in dealing with EMO and agriculture representatives, and she hasn't received a penny for damages to land she leases, which she originally was told would be covered. While waiting for assistance for that disaster, farmers have been hit with BSC and Hurricane Juan. So I ask the Premier again, what does he have to say to Sandra Fisher, and why is he making her wait for assistance?
The Honourable the Premier.
I refer that to the Minister acting.
The Honourable Acting Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you very much. And certainly the situations dealing with guidelines and the auditors under the DFAA do take time, and ensuring that the federal government will honor its commitment meeting those guidelines under disaster, and we've dealt with the individual named and trying to assist her through that with the federal auditors. In regard to assistance for people in the red meat industry, and specifically the cattle industry, as the honourable member may remember from my previous answer, there is the BSC program that we fully participated in as a province. We've made payments and have received applications up until September 30th on slaughtered cattle throughout the summer. Those provincial dollars were in those programs, and provincial dollars were expended. And we have a program upcoming to allow advanced payments for cow-calf producers to lessen the financial impact on them as well, Mr. Speaker.
I will member for Hants East on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the minister would know that the applications people could make to September 30th was only for livestock killed as of August 30th. They didn't extend that deadline any. And our cattle industry mainly here is cow-calf operations, not slaughter cattle. So the minister would be aware that that BSC relief program doesn't apply to most of the cattle producers in this province, and therefore is basically ineffective. Mr. Speaker, these farmers just can't take any more. Every week they wait for help, and another week of overdue bills and calls from creditors. So, for what it's worth, I ask the Premier, when is your government going to admit our farmers are in a crisis situation, and will you commit today to extending the BSC program and offering timely disaster assistance?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I refer that to the acting minister.
The Honourable the Acting Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And to the honourable member, certainly the government is much more aware than the member opposite of the hardships of the beef industry, and have put significant increases in funding for the entire agriculture industry and programs throughout the last 4 or 5 years. And certainly the member opposite, if I answer it a third time, will be able to distinguish the BSC program, which has been run in each province in this country with the federal government, that it ended on September 30. The cow-calf operators, as I stated twice before, are not eligible, and those cow-calf operators, we are providing interim payments for them before they get their year end, so that they have dollars in hands. The situation is very serious, and this government does take it very serious.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. It's ironic that 3 days after the arrival of Hurricane Juan, some Nova Scotians in the HRM have just received $155 checks. While the money is undoubtedly welcome for those who have received this latest round of checks, imagine how much help could have been provided to Nova Scotians who are storm-battered by just a fraction of the $72 million spent on this pre-election tax scheme. The Minister of Finance is now warning that there will be more cuts in services because of the damage caused by Hurricane Juan. My question is to the Minister, how can the Minister justify more cuts to public services after his government has wasted over $72 million for a pre-election tax scheme?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And to the Honourable Member, I will indicate that at our quarterly financial update, we indicated that there would be adjustments in the plan as we go forward to March 31st. This is clearly one of those unforeseen events and an adjustment that we will have to make. The government has indicated they're going to help, and we will make the adjustments in our budget to deal with it.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
Thank you. Nova Scotians didn't ask for the $155 check, but they are now asking the government for help, not for adjustments. The minister has an obligation to tell the public why his government was not prepared to deal with an emergency after wasting the $72 million. Will the minister tell this House exactly how far he's prepared to cut important services in order to balance the budget?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I don't presume that the honourable member was saying that giving a tax reduction, making this province competitive, and making this province a better place and a better productive is not a valuable process. This government put forward its budget. That was a major part of our budget as we go forward, and we're going to deal with these unexpected events as they come along.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
They're coming.
The short-sighted tax scheme has left the government short of resources to respond to the hurricane damage. Our major hospital is damaged, schools have been damaged, and the minister wants to cut even further. Nova Scotians didn't vote for the minister to slash and burn government services, but they do need help. Instead of musing in the media, will the minister tell the people exactly what he means when he indicates more cuts are coming?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the honourable member knows, back 3 weeks ago when we introduced and we brought forward our spring adjustment, the September adjustments are halfway through the year, we indicated we were going to ask departments to look at ways to save money. That's what we've been doing, Mr. Speaker. That's what we continue to do, and we're going to manage through this crisis, and we're going to be able to deal with all these issues.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, there's no doubt that Hurricane Juan has hit our natural resources sector extremely hard. Fishermen, farmers, woodlot owners are just now beginning to tally the cost of damages to their property and equipment. These sectors and spin-off jobs represent several $1 billion to our economy. It is vital that the provincial government take every step necessary to help these industries to recover. So, Mr. Premier, my question is, given your government's poor track record in supporting these sectors in the past, what assurances can you offer the workers whose livelihood is on the line after Hurricane Juan?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite's question reminds members of the House that in the part of the province from which we come, the fishery and agriculture is an important part of our economic infrastructure. We have an interest in our part of the province in these two industries. And what I can say in reassurance to the member opposite and to reassure those people in that part of the province that as well rely on agriculture and fisheries, that the government is working aggressively to provide the kinds of supports, and we're doing that in concert with the federal government, that will provide a better relief program for participants in those two industries.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, to the Premier, farmers in Nova Scotia, as you know, are still waiting for disaster relief from the spring flooding, let alone the BSE crisis and now Hurricane Juan. Fishermen, speaking to them, don't know where to begin in their cleanup, not to mention replacing infrastructure in time for the upcoming lobster season in many areas of this province. And woodlot owners certainly need help to remove debris and plant new trees, but programs that now are inadequate. So again, my question to you, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier is, what's being done right now to include these important sectors in disaster relief from Hurricane Juan?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I know the question was prepared prior to some of the answers that the member opposite has already heard during question period. What I can say to the member opposite, if he would reflect back on the answers that we gave to previous questioners relative to problems in disaster relief, I would ask him to review those and answer it, because really the answer to his question has already been dealt with in question period.
The Member for Pictou West on your final supplementary.
Well, you're right, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Premier, in that regard on the preparation ahead of time. But my final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries in this House said yesterday that all he could offer was soothing words. Soothing words really aren't going to cut it, and hopefully it's not the best effort that your government is going to put forth to address this devastation that Nova Scotians are facing. So again, Mr. Premier, when is your government going to show leadership in this very real crisis and ensure the protection of our vital industries such as fishing, forestry, and agriculture?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I can remind the members opposite that during the last campaign, the blueprint actually did contain commitments to our resource-based industries. And I think in a very friendly way, I could remind the member opposite that fisheries and agriculture were not mentioned anywhere in the NDP platform.
Here, here, here.
The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
My question is for the Minister of EMO. Yesterday, the province announced a disaster financial assistance arrangement for those affected by Hurricane Juan. Could the Minister inform the House as to whether an assignment is being carried out and whether or not there is a preliminary dollar figure attached to the damage?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister responsible for the EMO.
Could the honourable member restate the question? I couldn't hear it clearly.
Please. The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis would you repeat the question, please?
Mr. Speaker, could the Minister inform the House as to whether an assignment has been carried out and whether or not there is a preliminary dollar figure attached to the damage?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the EMO.
Thank you very much. As the honourable member knows, the efforts at this point are to ensure people's safety and the restoration of power and getting life back to as close as normal for people affected by the storm. Certainly, we have put out requests to various government agencies, departments, to begin assessing cost of damage. As well, I'm sure the municipality will begin that process in the coming weeks, and the assessment coming from private individuals will begin in the near future.
The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, as the Minister is no doubt aware, the federal government requires a written request from the province asking for assistance. It is recommended that the request occurs as soon as possible after the damage. As of 10:42 this morning, there has been no request received by the federal government. My question is, if the Minister has not yet sent that request, when does he expect to send it?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the EMO.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Premier and myself had the opportunity to meet at considerable length with Minister McCollum, who's responsible for EMO and disaster relief federally. And obviously one of the issues we discussed was what was included under that DFAA, as well as extraordinary circumstances that individuals in coastal communities and agriculture and a number of other areas have experienced. Certainly, as soon as we get a reasonably accurate assessment, the federal minister awaits our request.
The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the reality is the province seems to be slow in responding to this crisis and has seemed to be giving up his leadership role. My question, when can we expect the Minister and the Premier to become more motivated to help alleviate the pain being caused by Hurricane Juan?
The Honourable Minister responsible for EMO.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the honourable member's question is a good one, and it certainly allows me the opportunity to commend all those people that were involved with EMO in the preparation and planning before the Hurricane Juan struck. Certainly members throughout every government department here, people in the municipal as well as the federal government level who, and as well as the private volunteers, local fire departments, search and rescue, who have worked countless hours in preparing as well as the execution and restoration of this disaster, and I certainly hope the honourable member is not playing down the efforts of those important Nova Scotians and volunteers, which he sounds like he is.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, my question through you is actually for the Premier. Many of the communities in my constituency have been extremely hard hit by Hurricane Juan, and the fishing communities which dot the coastline are real disaster zones. The residents in these areas, where I've spent many hours over the last couple of days, are still without power or cell service, in many cases, most cases, without phone service, because they have no power, they have no way of pumping water from their wells. They're bathing in local lakes, and even a boil water order would seem funny when there's nothing with which to boil the water. With fuel at a premium, generators, transportations, and chainsaws are all of limited use. Over and above the necessities of day-to-day life, many are in danger of losing their livelihoods altogether. Fishermen like those in Sambro have lost their wharves and gear, as we know. They're now struggling to find generators, freezer trucks, and any other method of preserving their bait and catches. Crab season began on Tuesday, and lobster season is approaching soon. Mr. Premier, could you detail for this House what specific assistance the province is willing to provide to individuals and communities in these circumstances?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that, again, is a good question. And yesterday, we had conversations with the Minister of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and who shares all our concerns about the fishery. He did do a surveillance yesterday of Sambro and the communities that are in your particular area. We were able to describe some of what he would see. He very much understands what's happening there relative to the impending opening, for example, of a lobster fishery. And he did make a commitment that he would work diligently to have the harbors up and running as quickly as possible. And we will be as well looking at the reaction of the federal government to the specific request we had to make additional programs available to fishermen who may fall into the cracks of the current program.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic on your first supplementary.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address my next question to the Minister of Emergency Measures. There are hundreds and hundreds of families who rely directly and indirectly on the viability of the fishery in this constituency. But when I called the Provincial Emergency Measures Organization yesterday, I was told that because the area lies within the Halifax Regional Municipality, it was HRM's responsibility, and that my message would be passed on to them. Mr. Speaker, this is a collective disaster, and it does merit a collective response. We know there was the option of declaring a provincial state of emergency, but for reasons yet unexplained, the Minister did refuse. Why is it that, Mr. Minister, that the province has refused to take responsibility for coordinating efforts and responses in this disaster, as the people of Nova Scotia have a right to expect?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the EMO.
Thank you very much, that's a very good question and allows me the opportunity to explain what an Emergency Measures Act requires, what it's about, and yes, it was there in preparation. It was not needed in our view, or in my view, to execute. I could have had it at hand through the entire evening. But in relationship to the devolution of responsibilities under EMO, I'd like to remind the members the provincial EMO coordinates all the agencies involved at the provincial government level, as well as all the volunteer agencies, but just as importantly, at the municipal level. And at the municipal level, the HRM is the body on the ground that allows those services, allows those opportunities or projects or delivering the service to occur, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic on your final supplementary.
I guess, Mr. Speaker, this raises several other questions which will have to wait for another day. But in the meantime, I maybe should just reiterate what all my colleagues have been saying on this side of the House. We're certainly inspired by the dedication and the hard work of the Emergency Measures Organization, all the volunteers and staff who've been helping with the cleanup. But they're tough questions which remain in times like these. And above all, we really need government leadership. Again, what are the next immediate and specific steps to ensure that more resource-dependent livelihoods, which are essential to all of us in the province, aren't lost because of the lack of coordination?
Now, Minister responsible for the EMO.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, EMO, as I should reiterate to the House, is a collective of over 30 agencies, government and volunteer, that deliver services in times of emergency, and the issues are coordinated. They do not require a logo of the province of Nova Scotia when they're addressing the media of the issue. The best group to deliver the service or the resources are the ones closest to the people. They would be supervised in coordination with the provincial EMO. That is the chain of events. That is how EMO works. And maybe at some point in the future, we can have tours EMO and presentations to caucuses so that people have an understanding of how services are delivered in this province.
The honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. The government has had months to deal with the BSE crisis. The Premier knows about the BSE crisis and he knows what farmers need. My question is, why won't the Premier help save the beef farms in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Premier.
I refer that to the Acting Minister.
The Honourable the Acting Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the industry, in coordination and partnership with the provincial government, have worked very hard all summer lobbying the federal government to get the borders open, because the real solution to our BSE situation is the availability and the opportunity to export beef into the United States and other countries that have banned it. But on the short term, this province has provided its matching funding with the federal government on the BSC program for slaughtered cattle, and were quickly and one of the first to make sure that money and commitment was there, and have been processing applications, issuing checks all summer.
Order, please. There's too much noise in the chamber. The honourable member for Annapolis on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again to the Premier. The Premier knows the problem, and the agriculture community has offered a solution. It doesn't get any more complicated than that. Why is the Premier allowing the beef farms in Nova Scotia to die?
The Honourable the Premier.
Refer that to the Acting Minister.
The Honourable the Acting Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the beef industry and the red meat industry as a whole are facing very difficult situations. And certainly the beef farmers and this government and this province realize that for future growth, the borders have to be open. We have worked closely with the industry in our efforts to get the federal government to negotiate those agreements to open borders with the United States and other countries that have banned our beef. The borders have opened to a certain amount at this point, which is a beginning. But, Mr. Speaker, short-term Band-Aid methods such as the BST is not the long-term solution to the beef industry. What needs to continue to happen is the expansion and consumption of agricultural products produced here in Nova Scotia being supplied to our own populace.
The honourable member for Annapolis on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the very least, the Minister and the Premier could present his own made in Nova Scotia solution. Why won't the Premier take a leadership role in this crisis and offer Nova Scotians a solution to a Nova Scotia problem and help save the family farm?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the government continues to support industries like agriculture, like fisheries, like forestry, and we will continue to do so.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Natural Resources. The people of Nova Scotia awoke to a devastating picture in our newspapers this morning. What looks like the almost complete devastation of one of the province's most treasured urban green spaces, Point Pleasant Park. In fact, I'd like to table a photocopy of that from today's paper. Mr. Speaker, in fact, this park looks more like a clear cut right now, and this picture will support that in case no one's seen a clear cut. HRM's tree specialist, in fact, saw when he flew over there that it was total devastation and that he is not sure that, he thinks it's a complete write-off. We have also seen the devastation of another of HRM's most prized parks, the public gardens, where dozens of trees were ripped from the ground by the force of Hurricane Juan. Perhaps as much as 20% of these trees are now gone. My question to the Minister of Natural Resources: what is your department doing to assess the extent of the damage and determine what can be done to begin restoring these and other public wooded parks across the province?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. Our department is working with HRM and their Parks Committee to assess the damage that is at the two parks here in Halifax.
Here, here. Now, member for Dartmouth East on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These parks, including others like Birch Cove in Dartmouth, which has also been ravaged by Hurricane Juan, mean so much to so many residents and visitors alike, and they belong to everybody. Therefore, it is a responsibility of this government and the minister to deal with these and other provincial parks. My question to the Minister of Natural Resources is, what actions have you taken to perhaps coordinate efforts with HRM and other municipalities that have sustained similar damage to their parks to determine the future of these areas?
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, to the member, our department is working with we have approximately 127 parks in the province of Nova Scotia, provincial parks, along with the HRM's parks here in the HRM district. And we are working with those people, and our staff has talked to the HRM members as early as this morning again over the park situation here in HRM.
Now, member for Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do appreciate that there's some communication going on. Mr. Speaker, my final question is to the Minister of Natural Resources. The minimum this minister should be doing is to appoint a person from his department to act as a liaison with HRM and other municipalities to determine the future of Point Pleasant Park, the public gardens, Birch Cove, and other public wooded parks in Nova Scotia. These trees are not just going to pop up on their own overnight. It could be hundreds of years before we see these parks back to the state in which they were up to a few days ago. Will the minister commit?
Order, please.
It's funny. Will the minister commit to this House today that he will do that?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, to the member opposite, we already have high-qualified staff in DNR that are coordinating with HRM onto their park situation here in HRM and all of our parks across Nova Scotia. And we do have qualified staff in HRM.
The Honourable Member for Halifax, Shabakdo.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you. My question is for the Minister responsible for emergency measures. Mr. Speaker, hurricanes, when they come, are not usually just one-off events. They, in fact, appear in sequence. They are, in fact, named alphabetically in sequence. We have had, so far here, the J, Hurricane Juan. There is also a K, Hurricane Kate. The Canadian Hurricane Centre is presently tracking Hurricane Kate, which could potentially affect Nova Scotia this Sunday or next week. I want to stress that it is still a few days from landfall, and we don't know the intensity of the storm or exactly where it will go, or indeed if it will hit Nova Scotia, though it's coming in this direction. Officials are meeting to discuss the hurricane. Minister, we have learned...
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Halifax, Shabakdo has the floor.
Minister, we have learned some lessons about the need for better public information and preparedness this week. What will you do differently if Hurricane Kate becomes an imminent threat to Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the EMO.
Mr. Speaker, I really don't know how to answer the hypothetical question or if it's a hypothetical member. But in any case, it's all hypothetical. We have an EMO and a system in place, and we will be prepared if we will be prepared, as we always are, at EMO if it becomes a danger.
The honourable member for Halifax Shabakto on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the hard fact is that hurricane season is far from over, and people are still cleaning up here from Hurricane Juan. We need to get the message to all Nova Scotians on how they can be prepared and safe should Hurricane Kate make landfall in our province next week. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the likely part of the province it may well hit if it comes here would be Cape Breton. I asked the minister that with 60,000 Nova Scotians still without power, how is emergency measures planning to ensure the message gets out in a timely manner should Hurricane Kate become a threat?
Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The honourable minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization.
Obviously, we will get the information out the same as we did last week as Hurricane Juan approached. The honourable member has been showing documentation that essential products, what you should do, shelters, was listed on the tabs of the paper on Saturday last and Sunday last. As those hurricanes or any imminent danger approach, the information is relayed to all media outlets. The media during this last Hurricane Juan were exemplary. We had cooperation, Mr. Speaker, from all major media outlets in the days before Hurricane Juan landed, stating essentials and precautions that people should make. And all forms of media on a very regular basis were providing information and imminent warnings. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Halifax Shabakto on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we're talking Sunday, possibly Monday. I will table the tracking information from both the Canadian and American hurricane centers that shows that this hurricane, Hurricane Kate, is moving towards Atlantic Canada. My question to the minister is, how is this government going to ensure that Nova Scotians are better informed and better prepared than they were for Hurricane Juan?
The honourable minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we will deal in correct and accurate information supplied by the various hurricane agencies and meteorological experts that are supplied across North America. We will relay that to Nova Scotians with the aid of the media here that have been extremely helpful and who did an exemplary job of advising Nova Scotians in conjunction with EMO during this last crisis.
The honourable member for Preston.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization. The Minister of Finance finally admitted there is a crisis from Hurricane Juan, a crisis that's going to grow for families in Nova Scotia. I was recently speaking to a constituent, and with his permission, I'm going to relay his situation. Mr. Brooks, who is over 80 years old, who has lived in East Preston all his life, is one of the many victims of the devastation of Hurricane Juan. His 60-year-old home, which he built himself and has lived in his entire adult life, has suffered serious roof damage. Mr. Brooks, being on a fixed income, unable to afford home insurance, is unable to afford the cost of repairs and unable himself to do the repairs. My question to the minister, what action plan do you have to ensure that individuals like Mr. Brooks are going to be able to access the disaster relief monies?
The honourable minister responsible for EMO.
Mr. Speaker, again, this province and this government took the prudent action 3.5 years ago to ensure that there was a program for disaster relief for uninsurable losses in place for citizens of Nova Scotia. That program, commonly known as the DFAA Assistance Program, is there to help Nova Scotians if they have uninsurable losses from a situation such as this hurricane.
The honourable member for Preston on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are countless seniors and fixed incomes in a similar situation. And as a result of the last disaster we had with the major flood, when many people are still waiting to get compensation that were not insurable, including a lot of senior citizens, which I feel the government didn't do a very proper job on compensating people in that regard. When you look at senior citizens, they're the most vulnerable citizens we have, people that help build our country. My question to the minister is, why does your disaster relief program not provide relief for people such as Mr. Brooks and others in similar circumstances?
Hear, hear. The honourable minister responsible for the EMO.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I was doing an interview up on Walnut Street previous to the House, and a senior approached me. He had had several trees down on his home, and that senior was very appreciative of and approached me of the warnings EMO had provided previous to Juan, the updates ongoing even though he didn't have power. As well, that senior expressed to me the caring attitude of his neighbors and the young people. They had removed the tree off of his property, no power lines involved, and those trees had been removed to the house in anticipation of putting up power. That senior, in his circumstances, certainly wasn't aware and asked me the question, will I receive any assistance if I have house damage? Mr. Speaker, I had to ask that senior, are you insurable or are you not?
Order, please. Order, please. Actually, beginning next week, we're going to see shortened question and answers because it is getting carried way beyond on both sides of the House. The honourable member for Preston.
Well, it was a very nice story the minister was starting to tell us here, but it doesn't address the question. This is a real serious concern for seniors. Now, you can slough it off and say you talked to somebody and thought it was a great idea that someone voluntarily helped them. This is to a point for many seniors that they may not be able to live in their homes anymore and may have to abandon their homes. Homes have been in all their lives. So I would ask a serious answer this time. Is the government going to provide assistance to seniors in this situation that do not have insurance and not repeat what they did with the flood?
The honourable minister responsible for the EMO.
Again, Mr. Speaker, the disaster relief program, federal and provincial, applies to uninsurable situations.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, we have learned that healthcare workers at the New Waterford Consolidated Hospital are experiencing serious symptoms that believe they are the result of heavy metals and dust inhaled during their working in the hospital during recent renovations, Speaker. Some are too sick to continue working, and the Chief Executive Officer of District 8, the CBRH Authority, says there, and I quote, investigating these issues have been a very serious matter. My question to you, through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister is, what actions has the Minister taken to assist the Health Authority in determining the cause, the symptoms that have been displayed by these healthcare workers, and how many workers have been exposed and are ill because of these?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. The officials at the District Health Authority have been in communication with our department relative to the situation referenced by the honourable member, and we will continue to work with them. I can say to the House and to all Nova Scotians that there is a very real concern on the part of the District Health Authority to try and get to the bottom of the situation referenced by the honourable member, and they are continuing to investigate the situation. There has been a certain level of frustration on their part in terms of attempting to pinpoint a cause with respect to the situation referenced by the honourable member, and to make a definite determination as to whether or not there is a link between the illnesses and any level of activity that took place within the facility.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, as the minister is quite aware, that all these symptoms propped up after renovations were done in the area that these people were working in, and they were exposed to such harmful heavy metals as lead, barium, and nickel, and these are all contained within their bodies after testing. So it's a matter of record of where it came from, Mr. Minister. So until the exact cause of this problem is determined, Minister, what is being done to treat and protect these other workers at the Waterford Consolidated Hospital?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell the honourable member and members of the House that as a result of the situation referenced by the member, they have in fact been monitoring the situation, and there doesn't appear at this point to be any additional cases with respect to the illness, other than those that came about on the first wave. And so far, there isn't any additional evidence. They are monitoring the situation, and hopefully, there will not be any additional evidence of any illness with respect to this situation.
Member Cape Breton Centre on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, fortunately, there's been no patient illnesses as a result of these workplace dust hazards, Mr. Speaker. But as we're sure that always that worker safety is a priority, certainly patients in a hospital should be even a higher priority. So I want to ask the minister, what actions have you taken to ensure that none of these illnesses have affected any of the patients who are being served by the Waterford Consolidated Hospital at the time of these renovations?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, I appreciate the concern of the honourable member relative to the patients at that facility. And it's a concern that is shared by the District Health Authority and by my department and myself, obviously. We have not, as I indicated previously, found any evidence of illness relative to patients as a result of that activity. And it's, I think, important to note, Mr. Speaker, that the renovation has, in fact, been completed for some period of time. So if the honourable member's suggestion that the illness does, in fact, relate to the renovation, then we would not anticipate there being any further cases. But it is a situation about which we are very concerned, and we are staying in contact with the District Health Authority, and they are actively pursuing the situation, monitoring and seeking, carrying out investigative activities that would try to lead them to a definitive cause with respect to the situation. I thank the member for bringing the question forward.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I asked the Minister of Health a very serious question about the issue of wait times, dealing both with surgeries and emergency room departments. And Mr. Speaker, I asked him what he is going to do to address the issue. His first response was that he was working with the Capital District, and his second response said that he was monitoring the situation. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is, very simply, is he working with the Capital District to develop a plan to address that problem, or is the Minister just simply monitoring the situation?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell the honourable member and members of the House that as we speak, officials from my department are meeting with officials of the Capital District Health Authority and working with them relative to addressing the situation. Mr. Speaker, we have a facility.
Order, please. Time allotted for question period has expired. Government business, the Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call the order of business public bills for second reading?
Order, please. Order, please. Before we go to the government business, my apologies. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to make an introduction in the West Gallery of to guests who we have with us from the wonderful district of Argyll. First, the warden, Mr. Aldrich d'Entremont, if he were able to stand, and also Jean-Bernard d'Entremont, a recognized educator from the district of Argyll as well.
Thank you. We certainly welcome our guest to the gallery today, the Honourable Member for Halifax Needham, on introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And it's my pleasure to introduce members of the House to a guest in our West Gallery by the name of William O'Connor, who is, I believe, a resident in the district of Halifax-Chebucto, the constituency. William, would you stand and receive the welcome of the House, please? Thank you.
Government business, the Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call the order of business public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 1, the Insurance Reform Act?
Bill number 1, the Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre. You have 37 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to make a few more points.
Please, just before the Honourable Member begins, the Honourable the House Leaders for the three parties, if you have about 2 minutes, I'd like to meet with you outside, if you could, before you get away. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to rise and finish my time in regards to Bill 1 and bring back a few items that I did not have time for in debate on Tuesday. And one of them is before this government really did anything substantive about looking into the dramatic increases in automobile insurance in this province, it certainly sat back and was compliant with it for quite some time. And I believe that the evidence will show that one of the reasons for the being basically compliant to what was going on was that they were in a position to make a windfall tax from it, Mr. Speaker. They made, and with really no apologies from the former Minister of Finance, when he clearly said in an August 2000 update to the province that it was clear that the books would remain balanced by the amount of revenue it was receiving from the dramatic increases in the insurance rates in this province. So it led me to believe that this government was certainly willing to, if not aid and abet the insurance industry, it certainly wasn't willing to fight it. It saw it as a cash cow. It saw it by a means of balancing its books on the backs of the auto insurance consumers of this province. Speaker, I think somebody might want to intervene here.
Yes, the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member, as he was just speaking about the insurance premiums, said that at the update, I indicated that we were making major gains and major substantial increases. What I said in the forecast is that we were not changing our forecast on revenues from insurance, not that we were expecting increases.
Not a point of order. It's a disagreement between two members. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, if the minister had been listening closer, I said the former Minister of Finance in his August 2002 update. This is one thing they can't blame on you today, Minister. This is your former compatriot on that side who clearly said that. I mean, it's there. It's part of the public record, and it's there for anybody that wants to see that government sat back and certainly enjoyed the bounties of that revenue, and was not in no way, shape, or form willing to go after the insurance industry in a substantive way, as long as it was making those dramatic increases in revenue. Which, I think most people in this House realize that you have to be fiscally responsible, but at what measure? Are you saying you're balancing your books by putting an undue burden on the driving consumers of this province? Are you saying, we're going to balance the books, but here's how we're going to do it? We're going to take a segment of our population and allow them to be discriminated against, allow them to be dropped at will by insurance companies, or otherwise being told things such as, we've looked at your driving record and now we're going to make your premiums that much more. And so this was allowed to go on. Another case where government from the insurance industry certainly gained considerable revenue was through the increase in fees. Now, the fees for going through Department of Motor Vehicles to get access to driver's abstracts have more than doubled with this government. And in turn, insurance companies using that information, their requests have more than doubled. So when you extrapolate that out, that was, I think in a period of less than a year, there was almost $4 million more in revenue through these requests. And clearly, there was two things here. The government was using it as a way for revenue resources and trying to fool us by saying we don't raise taxes, but it was another hidden tax. And it was another issue used by the insurance companies to get at our driving records. Because, we've seen the insurance companies do some pretty nefarious things in this province over the last couple of years to get at people. And one story I would tell you that they could only access by probably way of police records or driver's abstracts was one story related to me last year, Speaker, where this one person had gone out, had been involved in an accident that was no fault of theirs. Both parties get out, called the police as they should. The police arrive, both exchange insurance and valid driver information, and then proceed to rectify the situation without ever committing to a claim to either one of their insurances. So the insurance company is at no fault or is at no loss here at all. They've just had, it was a minor accident, but as you know, that these changes could be effective. But because that they did what they were supposed to do as good citizens, went out and contacted the police forces, and they investigated, and everyone moved forward. This was on their driver abstract, and indeed, when it came time to renew their license, renew their insurance, the insurance company used this accident to go against their record. There's nothing in Bill 1 to preclude insurance companies that same practice. This is something that has to be looked at, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned going into this, it was the hidden tax and indeed, as I say, about the doubling of the charges for the driver's abstract and the 4% tax revenue that the governments receive on each bill. I mean, if this is really a bill to help alleviate the burden on consumers of insurance, of automobile insurance, maybe the government should say, look, we had our windfall. Now I think it's time that we'll give back some of that windfall back to the consumers and then take a tax holiday. But certainly that's not part of what this government wanted to do. This government, it will place onuses on the insurance companies. They'll place onuses on the consumers, but take no blame themselves. When it comes to their revenue, that's sacrosanct, Mr. Speaker. So they don't want to move off of those positions. It's not about trying to find a lasting resolve to the automobile insurance dilemma in this province. It's about more or less looking after their own section and I would assert, looking after the insurance industry, because Bill 1 really does not give any real long-lasting impact to consumers. There's some short-term effects, but the long-term effects will be seen 6 months hence, where you'll see insurance companies going back to their old practices, as the minister is well aware, and he knows this. Well, the minister says I'm wrong, and we'll see in 6 months' time. I think one of us will be wrong, but it will not be me. Let's just talk about, the idea of putting limits on soft tissue injury and the idea that these are necessary. This is a necessary thing to be done to bring down the costs. Now, everybody but IBC, the Insurance Bureau of Canada, believes that there's no real increase in these, what they would like us to refer to as frivolous litigation. It's this idea of the Insurance Bureau of Canada and their idea of the sky is falling, and this is what's causing it, is soft tissue injury. Now, the whole idea of soft tissue injury is one that can be just such a mind trap to get into, but this government has willingly accepted that that's the fix-all. If you put limits and caps on people's injury claims, then this will all go away, that life will be perfect. Well, Mr. Speaker, that is totally wrong. This is a problem not born out of too many large claims. This is an industry problem born out of return for investment. And when you really confront the insurance industry on this question, you realize that that's the truth. There's no other rational examination or reason. Mr. Speaker, you look at it, you look at the effects of it. You say, okay, these minor accidents, these fender benders, these whiplashes, this is what's causing us to see our rates soar. And the insurance company are telling us these are frivolous. These are just nuisance-type complaints, and if we just got them out of the way, life would be good. Well, let's just examine that a little closer and say, well, somebody gets whiplash going through at a stop sign. There's a minor injury. There's not much injury to the vehicles, but there's a whiplash injury. And the insurance company believes that it may be fraud involved. Then wouldn't you believe that it would be incumbent upon the underwriters to take that to the point if they believe that somebody is falsifying documents and committing a fraud? But rather than them take this to court and experiencing and getting a legal definition, they want the legislature to do it for them. They want the legislature, by way of capping these limits, that this will make it right for them. Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think this is the place for private automobile insurance companies to be here having their profit margin protected. I think if somebody should be protected in this House, Mr. Speaker, is the automobile insurance consumers of this province. But yet Bill 1 goes a much farther way of protecting the insurance industry and not the consumer side of this, Mr. Speaker. So what do? We can, as we advocate, and I make no apology for it, Mr. Speaker, we advocate a driver-owned public auto system, one that is fair, that that has been purported by and supported by many factors in this province or this country. It's been proven, as in provinces where it exists, in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and British Columbia, as a working model. It works. There is complaints. There's complaints. I'm sure there's even complaints about this fine Tory government. But there are complaints, Mr. Speaker, but we get by them. And it's not, we're not appealing to a bunch of offshore companies because, that's something to look at here. Of who are we really appealing to here? Are we appealing to like a homegrown group of people that have their bases here in Nova Scotia, or indeed in Canada, or indeed in North America? Well, when we find it that the majority of the large underwriters that belong to the Insurance Bureau of Canada are headquartered in places like Bristol, England, or The Hague, in those places that have really no vested interest in driver safety in the province of Nova Scotia, except when it comes to their bottom line. And when it comes to their bottom line, they come knocking on our government's door looking for caps so they can realize more profits than they have today. Speaker, there was an interesting last year when we had the occasion to have members from the Insurance Bureau of Canada in front of the Economic Development Committee of this House as it was constituted at the time, and you would ask them questions, and I'll give them their due. What facts that as they wanted and as they wanted to present them, they had them. There's no lack of information, as we've seen in the numerous newspaper ads and so on from the Insurance Bureau of Canada when they want to ramp up an issue. They're telling us now if we just pull up our headrests another couple inches, all these whiplash injuries will go away. And that will be another topic I'll come back to shortly, Mr. Speaker. But nonetheless, that when they were there, when you ask them questions like, why don't you litigate, they blame the courts. They blame the courts and they blame the consumers. Because one, invariably, if you listen to them, have to go hand in hand. They tell you that these are fraudulent claims because they feel that they're being told to pay too much, and they're blaming the courts for believing these fraudulent claims. So it makes absolutely no sense where they're coming from. But yet, when you press that industry, and there was questions asked to the industry of like, well, from time to time, consumers would tell us they've had a crack in the windshield. And so you go to get it repaired, and the people within that industry, well, the first